This is today's cyber news for September 29th. You can also listen on the go at dailycyber.news. Let's get started. Medusa claims it broke into Comcast and pulled roughly 834 gigabytes of data, then posted about 20 screenshots it says prove internal access. They're running a very public dual-track extortion. $1.2 million for outsiders to buy the data, or $1.2 million for Comcast to pay for deletion. Comcast hasn't confirmed a breach tied to Medusa, so right now this sits in the gray zone, assertions by a threat actor with teasers designed to crank up pressure. If it's authentic, the sheer volume suggests they touched more than a single endpoint and likely browsed file shares or document repositories. Media and telecom brands are loud targets. The aim is less stealth, more theater that spooks customers and partners. We're watching for 3 signals that usually follow: any victim confirmation, takedown requests aimed at leak sites, or the nuclear option, a larger data dump that would force notifications.
Read aloud this text in EN-US accent. Akira ransomware crews continue to authenticate to SonicWall SSL VPN portals even when one-time password multi-factor authentication is enabled. What's puzzling investigators is how normal the logins look in the audit trail. That points away from a flashy real-time bypass and toward compromised factors, think previously stolen OTP seeds or related secrets that let attackers present as legitimate users. From there, the cadence is brutally fast. Get in, enumerate, stage exfiltration, and encrypt, often inside a single working day. SonicWall has urged resets of VPN credentials, token re-enrollment, and current firmware, while incident responders note that older weaknesses and carried-over configurations from past generations can linger in production. The lesson isn't a single zero-day narrative. It's that the identity supply chain around your gateway matters. When the factors themselves are cloned or replayed, alerts look ordinary until lateral movement and encryption make the stakes obvious.
The April attack on the UK's co-op rippled across both data and logistics, and the real-world effects were visible: empty shelves and service disruptions as distribution and point-of-sale systems struggled. A group calling itself Dragon Force later shared screenshots and messages to support data theft claims, shifting the story from systems down to blended extortion. Financial reporting since then has mapped the toll lost, revenue on the order of $275 million, and a separate profit hit, underscoring how thin margins and just-in-time stocking magnify cybershocks. In modern retail, centralized planning tools and supplier connectivity are force multipliers. When they wobble, the store floor feels it within hours. The long tail now is regulatory and customer notification work as investigators sort what was accessed, for how long, and whether any stolen data emerges in criminal markets. Expect that process to move in stages, with updates tied to what analytics can confirm about specific records. Union County, Ohio, disclosed that a May intrusion led to theft of Social Security numbers and financial data for 45,487 people, including residents and staff. The timeline tells a familiar public sector story: initial containment, engagement of outside forensics, the painstaking data mining needed to identify exactly who is affected, and then the mechanics of notification and support. County environments are complicated: interconnected services, legacy systems, and uneven controls across departments. So an incident in one area can create risk for others that share credentials, portals, or vendors. What stands out here is the specificity of the confirmed data categories. When personal identifiers like Social Security numbers are in scope, the risk of follow-on fraud rises and remediation gets more complex. There's also the indirect risk path. Local agencies often interface with state systems and private partners, which means investigators have to map trust relationships as carefully as they map malware activity. Attackers are buying search ads and leaning on SEO to push polished, look-alike download pages for Microsoft Teams that actually install the Oyster backdoor, also known as broomstick or cleanup loader.
The lure works because Teams is everywhere, frequently reinstalled, and users often search for a quick download rather than navigating vendor sites. Once it lands, Oyster grants remote command execution, can fetch additional payloads, and sets up persistence, turning a single mistaken click into durable access. Campaigns tied to Oyster have been observed since mid-2023, but this wave is notable for how mainstream the ad placements and landing pages look. Telemetry and incident write-ups point to infections in small businesses and, via personal or unmanaged devices, footholds that later touch enterprise apps. The practical challenge isn't just detection after the fact, it's helping users distinguish real installers from convincing clones when they're racing to get into a meeting. Researchers are calling out a critical issue in Salesforce Agentforce they've dubbed ForcedLeak, and the gist is this. When an AI agent ingests untrusted content, like a web page, an email, or a document seeded with hidden instructions, the agent can be tricked into pulling sensitive CRM records it should never touch. The score assigned is 9.4 on the CVSS scale, but the real story is orchestration, not a single faulty model. Many deployments wire Agentforce to broad read scopes across customer data. If the guardrails aren't tight, a poisoned input becomes a quiet data mover. That's why the research community is pushing for stricter action whitelists, better provenance on content sources, and auditing of every tool call the agent makes. Expect vendors to publish more opinionated defaults that narrow what an agent can do out of the box. Fortress GoAnywhere managed file transfer platform is back in the spotlight after a maximum severity flaw, CVE 2025-10035, was reportedly exploited a week before disclosure. It's a deserialization bug in the license handling component that allows unauthenticated command injection, which is a perfect recipe for smash-and-grab data theft. Timelines now point to exploitation beginning around September 10th, with public advisories landing on the 18th. It's a familiar pattern with file transfer software: high-value data flows, lots of edge exposure, and very fast weaponization once details circulate. What remains unclear is how many internet-facing instances were hit during that quiet window, which versions are most at risk, and whether intruders paired the initial hit with credential harvesting to come back later. You'll likely see more indicators of compromise and cloud detections tuned for this traffic as scanning continues. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre says state-linked actors used recent Cisco firewall vulnerabilities to drop two new malware families called Ray Initiator and Line Viper. Compared to earlier waves, these implants show upgraded evasion and post-exploit tradecraft, which suggests an active refresh cycle on the attacker side. Cisco started digging after attacks on multiple government entities, and the advisory frames this as a classic edge device play. Strike while fixes are still rolling out, plant durable access on a box that sees everything, and then pivot inward to higher value segments. Managed security providers are now baking the samples into detections, while network teams comb through inventories and crash logs for faint signs of tampering. Expect follow-on reports that map infrastructure overlaps with earlier firewall-focused espionage and that refine hunting rules for unusual management plane activity. Google's threat intel team is warning about a Go-written backdoor it calls Brickstorm operating inside U.S. legal services, SaaS providers, business process outsourcers, and technology firms, sometimes for months before discovery. The campaign, which researchers tie to a China Nexus operator, favors persistence and quiet collection over smash-and-grab tactics. Initial access looks more like phishing, valid accounts, or supply chain paths than loud exploits. What makes it tricky is that command and control blends into normal enterprise traffic, so separating real tasking from background noise takes careful telemetry. The bigger concern is concentration risk. These sectors aggregate sensitive client data, so a single compromise can fan out across many downstream organizations. Expect more technical notes on the malware's scheduling, task modules, and the kinds of infrastructure it prefers to blend with. A fresh email run is pushing the XWARM Remote Access Trojan, RAT for short, using Spanish-language pending invoice lures and XL add-ins with the .xlm extension. Victims often see what looks like a blank or corrupted document, which is part of the social engineering. Meanwhile, the add-in executes quietly. Once XWARM lands, operators can harvest credentials, inventory the system, and pull down follow-on tools tailored to the victim. Invoice-themed waves keep working because they slot neatly into real business workflows in finance and procurement. Telemetry suggests the operators are opportunistic. Broad recipient lists, iterative lure language, and a menu of downstream actions that scales from light recon to a deeper toolset depending on the environment they encounter.
A quick update on the AT&T class action settlement. The company agreed to pay $177 million tied to two separate incidents, the 2019 breach and the 2024 Snowflake-related exposure. The structure matters for customers because it defines how claims work. People affected by the earlier breach can seek up to $5,000 for documented losses, while those tied to the Snowflake incident can claim up to $2,500. If someone was hit by both, they may file for each bucket. There's also compensation for time spent dealing with the fallout. And there's a clear deadline on the calendar, November 18, 2025. It's a reminder of how long the tail can be for data-rich telecoms. Years after an incident, companies are still navigating costs, operational scrutiny, and renewed attention when new exposures touch old datasets.
We've also seen a run of supply chain compromises rippling through the auto sector. 3 major vehicle manufacturers reported disruptions in the past month that trace back to issues at suppliers, not necessarily the car makers themselves. That's the pattern we keep seeing in tightly coupled production networks. Attackers reach a Tier 1 or Tier 2 vendor, then pivot through shared systems or trusted integrations, and the household brand ends up wearing the public impact. Details vary case by case. Sometimes it's ransomware, sometimes it's credential abuse, but the outcome is familiar. Delayed parts, rescheduled assembly lines, and guidance that gets nudged by operational drag. For investigators, these incidents don't live only in logs and EDR dashboards. A lot of the real work runs through procurement, contracts, data sharing maps, and VPN trust because that's where the blast radius is defined on the factory floor. On macOS, Microsoft's threat team is tracking a refreshed XCSS toolkit. The new build adds a few notable capabilities. It can clip cryptocurrency addresses from the clipboard. It expands to exfiltrating Firefox data instead of focusing mainly on Chromium browsers. And it brings a sturdier persistence layer. XCSS first hit the radar in 2020 through poisoned Xcode projects. And this iteration leans harder on obfuscation and run-only Apple scripts to stay quiet. Volume is described as limited and targeted, which lines up with campaigns where developer workstations or creative pros are the real prize. It's less smash and grab and more patient access credential theft, session hijacking, and selective collection. As vendors tune telemetry for these modules, expect more detections to surface simply because the new behaviors make the family easier to fingerprint. Researchers are detailing a phishing wave that impersonates Ukrainian government agencies and relies on SVG image attachments to kick off a multi-stage chain. The attachment fetches a password-protected zip and a compiled HTML help file, a CHM, that executes CountLoader. From there, the loader can pull down PureRAT for remote control or pivot to crypto mining with PureMiner on lower-value machines. The attraction of this approach is that the files look harmless at a glance, an image here, a help file there, while the language and branding push recipients to just open it. It's a flexible operation. On lightly defended endpoints, the operators can settle for mining, and on more interesting workstations, they can escalate with a full remote access toolkit. The theme is familiar. Commodity crews keep iterating on file formats and download steps without abandoning the invoice-style social engineering that keeps bringing people to the door.
There's also a long-running social engineering scheme that's shifted from Facebook ads into Google ads and YouTube placements, promising free access to TradingView Premium but delivering malware. The landing pages are polished and the domains look plausible, which is why busy creators and traders keep getting snared. Once the installer runs, the Trojan establishes command and control, inventories the host, and then fetches follow-on payloads tailored to the environment it finds. The move to mainstream ad platforms widens the funnel. People searching for charting tools are a steady stream, and ad placements meet them exactly where they're looking. The broader risk is search-driven get-it-now downloads on unmanaged or personal devices that later interact with corporate applications. The campaign's success isn't about sophisticated exploits. It's about convincing presentation and the habit of trusting what appears at the top of a results page. Investigators say an app designed to dox critics of conservative activist Charlie Kirk ended up exposing its own user community. The issue wasn't a single glitch so much as a stack of weak controls. Insecure logging, sloppy token handling, and misconfigured cloud pieces that leaked identities tied to submissions and lookups. It's a pattern we've seen before with vigilante OSINT platforms. They gather sensitive data without enterprise-grade safeguards, and once public scrutiny arrives, the surface area for abuse becomes obvious. Overbroad API responses, debug endpoints still live, and administrative functions left open. This case will likely draw regulatory attention because it mixes political harassment with defective data protection, and it shows how quickly a weaponized database can boomerang on its creators when basic security is missing. In The Hague, Dutch police arrested two 17-year-olds accused of planting Wi-Fi sniffers near Europol and Eurojust offices and even the Canadian embassy. Reporting ties the activity to Russian intelligence interests, but investigators stress there's no sign those agencies' internal systems were breached. The tactic reflects a low-cost collection model. Position gear near high-value targets and try to harvest wireless metadata or credentials, hoping careless personal devices or guest networks leak enough to bootstrap access. European agencies have hardened since earlier embassy-adjacent incidents, but this episode highlights the gray zone between no breach and no risk, especially when staff connect personal gear close to sensitive facilities. Expect charges under computer misuse and espionage statutes while forensics reconstruct what the devices actually captured. Cisco Talos is reporting a fresh wave of intrusions across Central and South Asia using an evolved PlugX strain with overlaps to bookworm tooling. Targets include telecom and manufacturing, which are classic choices for operators who want concentrated data and leverage. The technical picture shows DLL sideloading via legitimate apps, heavy obfuscation, and an encryption sequence that blends XOR, RC4, and Windows decompression techniques that complicate static detection and frustrate analysts trying to follow the bouncing ball. This round also reuses code linked to earlier Rainy Day and Turian backdoors, but shifts loaders and keys just enough to duck signatures while preserving lineage. Telecoms are especially attractive because once inside, attackers can pivot into lawful intercept interfaces, roaming systems, or managed customer networks, turning one foothold into many. Microsoft acknowledged a bug in classic Outlook for Windows that blocks OMEV2 encrypted messages sent from other tenants. Users trying to open those emails get an error, which has disrupted legal, healthcare, and cross-tenant workflows that depend on protected mail. The company has posted interim guidance while it works on a full fix and emphasized that Microsoft 365 services are unaffected, and the new Outlook is not in scope. Operationally, this shows how fragile cross-organization encrypted mail flows can be. A regression on the client side can stall incident notifications, contract exchanges, or patient communications until admins can route urgent messages through alternate channels. Once the patch lands, the cleanup job will include clearing up failed threads and retraining staff about which client supports which encryption scenarios. And Microsoft plans to add a security control in Edge to block locally sideloaded extensions unless they meet new trust checks. Developers often use sideloading to test add-ons before publication, but attackers also abuse it to plan adware, steal sessions, or inject code into corporate web apps. The change aims to preserve legitimate workflows while closing the door on bring-your-own-extension infections that evade store scanning. For enterprises, this fits a broader pattern where the browser is treated more like an endpoint with richer policy, clearer provenance, and fewer unsigned components living inside the browser's privileged space. Expect updated administrative templates and telemetry that let security teams tell sanctioned dev testing from risky sideloading across user fleets. That's the Bare Metal Cyber Daily Brief for September 29, 2025. For more, visit baremetalcyber.com and listen daily at dailycyber.news. Thanks for listening. We're back tomorrow.